Loneliness is just a reflection of honesty. Like when you feel lonely, it's because you haven't found a connection that is true to you, and therefore you feel lonely in effect. So when I think about that within the context of life and people, I talk to a lot of people, and a lot of people are so averse to that loneliness that they'll lower the bar, they'll lower their threshold for what connection is so that they don't feel lonely. So when I feel lonely, or I talk to someone who feels lonely, I'm like, I understand that, this is a negative feeling and no one wants to be in a chapter of loneliness, but it is a reflection that you haven't given up on that thing. So that's my optimistic rebranding of loneliness, because it means you haven't given up. Loneliness is such a compelling force within the way our internal dialogue works, because we're very quick to rebrand things. I remember conversations I would have in my head when I was in my mid-20s in my career, dating people, literally conversations of Case, why do you want more? Just relax. You're making good money. You're making 6 figures at this job. You're dating someone she's attractive and other people like her and she looks good on paper. Relax. Why are you pulling for more? And I think a lot of our conversations go like that, whether we have something and we're trying to talk ourselves out of wanting more, or we have nothing and we're trying to talk ourselves out of having something. But I think that's human nature, to really talk ourselves out of these things. And it's frustrating to look back and be like, man, I almost let that conversation win in my head. And I talk to so many people who look back and they're like, yeah, I remember the exact moment that I lowered the bar in response to loneliness, in order to stop feeling lonely. Because I think there's a lot of things in life that can, avert loneliness. It'd be very easy for me to be like, yeah, okay, I like fantasy football. That's enough. That's enough connection with my guy friends. That's fine. I hate fantasy football. It offers nothing. I don't care about that. Or whatever, spectrum you can choose. It's very easy to do that. I think the thing that I always encourage people to think about, whether it's within loneliness or some kind of emotion that's pulling you back, is recognizing the difference between facts and feelings. I think this is a topic, of course, that any therapist will really challenge you with. It's feel what you're feeling, feel the loneliness, feel the disappointment, feel the frustration. Let's sit in that emotion. We're not avoiding it. We're not sweeping it under the rug. We're not blaming ourselves, but then we're comparing it to facts. And facts are a subject in and of itself. But if you don't have a set of facts that you've determined that these are the facts of my life, these are the things that I believe in so firmly and fully that I will never negotiate on, if you don't have those to compare to your feelings, so within the context of a relationship, for instance, cliche, but what you want in a partner, and specifically why you want a partner. What is the purpose of a relationship for you? If you haven't sat down and decided that in some sense, those feelings are going to win every time, and your actions are always going to follow suit. So as a practical guy, it's if I have a feeling that's normal and human, and I'm going to sit in that feeling, and then I'm going to compare it to facts. But if I haven't done some semblance of mindfulness or journaling or therapy or just self-introspection to come up with facts, we're setting ourselves up to fail and to act out of loneliness. So what are the things you so firmly believe in? What are the experiences in your life that led you there? I talk a lot about being picky and selective. How did you get to these things? So I won't ramble on that, but I think facts versus feelings is how you arrive to that situation where you say, okay, I feel lonely, but here's the fact. And as a result, I'm going to challenge that. And I'm not going to let my actions follow suit.
I love that. Speaking of picky, though, because that's also the part of everything that we're talking about, right? You can always convince yourself sometimes in these things as you're doing the process. It's yes, but am I asking for the world? Right. Am I too picky? Should I not just be settling with this person who loves me? They really do love me. Yeah. The picky thing, right? I think we tell ourselves maybe we're being too picky. And then to your point, other people say that you're being picky. Yep. So how do you start to differentiate between, no, you're not being picky, you just have standards?
Yeah. It's a subject I love, because my whole thing with mindfulness as a whole is mindfulness in the way that I define it. There's many different ways, and I suppose there's no right or wrong way. For me, I think about mindfulness within the context of your life experiences, of the memories that you have at whatever age you are, making sense of those memories in a practical, logical, compassionate way. Instead of saying, here's a time I failed, this is proof that I'm a failure. Here's a time that I'm lonely, here's a proof that I'm a loser, so on and so forth. Finding ways to rebrand, reframe those memories in compassionate ways. That's how I think about mindfulness. It's very observation-based as opposed to mindfulness that is more spiritually based. It is you're a lawyer and you're saying, here's the facts and here's the conclusion. That's the mindfulness. And I think for dating and pickiness and selectiveness and the whole thing, it comes back to that. So when I think about the word picky, I think a lot about like our evolution as people when it comes to what we want in a partner. I think when you're young, you're in your maybe late teens, early 20s, certainly, I think there's a tendency to be picky in the sense that picky is version 1.0 of standards, in that you're like, I don't have enough life experience to truly know what I need in a partner. So I'm just going to kind of borrow that. And I'll listen to Case's podcast and I'll borrow that. Or I saw this in a movie, I'll borrow that. Nothing wrong with that. We're just sponges out there trying to figure out what's right for us because we don't have the life experience to say this, that, or the other. And that's version 1.0. And I think it's a great starting point. I think people need to give themselves credit for evolving past that as they get older, in that now you are selective, which is 2.0, which is saying I have had this bad experience and therefore this is my standard. I think when you have experiences that you can point to, that is what makes a standard or a boundary, for one, unbreakable, hopefully for you, but two, it's proof of why. I think mindfulness, the goal should be to give you emotional proof for your perspective or vision on life. And the reality of dating is, unfortunately, you're going to go through experiences where you experience probably the direct opposite of what you wanted, right? Someone lied to you, someone cheated on you, someone ghosted you, someone said one thing and did another thing. Like, this is just the reality of being human. Those are the experiences that I lean on that say, this is why you're selective. You have proof of why. You're not just guessing, you're not just theorizing, you're not just picking standards out of a hat and saying, oh, I want that, and the other. You're saying, I want that, and the other because I have these experiences. And I think if you can look at your life and say, this person, this experience taught me to have this standard, I don't think you're ever too picky because you have the experience. It's not just theory for you. So I find a lot of power in that. I think we need to give ourselves credit for the unfortunate experience we've been through, because those are the most empowering ones. They're the most difficult ones, of course, but they're the most empowering ones, particularly when it comes to being selective.
That's so freaking strong, but here's the tricky part of it. What if you've just been in bad relationships where now you don't actually believe that there's a higher standard? Like, I've been in a bad relationship in my past before I met my husband, and he was verbally abusive, he wasn't kind, and because he was my first boyfriend, because I was very vulnerable, because I didn't have any self-esteem, after him, it wasn't like I was like, well, I've got better standards now. I almost like had him as like, I guess this is base. So how do you start to assess even the standards that you've put for yourself on if they're healthy standards or not?
Yeah. So, I mean, that's where like I have nothing but empathy to offer. It's like, as a human, if you've been through back to back bad relationships, or if all you've ever known are bad relationships, because be real, there's some people who have just gotten the bad end of life and that's all they know. I think it's very easy to talk yourself out of really any redeeming standards or boundaries. And I think it's very easy to get in that headspace. I think for me, the easy answer would be talk to a therapist to unpack that. But for two, I think a lot about limiting beliefs, for instance, so like maybe related to having, a lack of standards in that sense. The question that I come back to is like, how can we kind of shock our system to maybe open ourselves up to another option? Maybe I do deserve more. Maybe all men aren't like this, all women are like this. How can we get ourselves into that headspace? The question I always come back to and say, okay, here's the things that I've been believing for a long time. Maybe I'm unlovable, for instance. Here's how my actions have followed suit. I've put up with people who, took advantage of me, who treated me like an option, so on and so forth. I've done these things. I've had this mindset. Because I believe in this reality, unlovable, don't believe something, don't deserve something. The question I always try to encourage myself to ask myself is, what if I'm wrong? And how would that change things? Just like in a moment of pure vulnerability to say, okay, I believe that I am unlovable, for instance, which is the reality I hope most people don't find themselves in. But what if I'm wrong? How would that change how I see life? How would that change what I do? So on and so forth. I think a moment like that, particularly like within journaling or therapy, I think it'd be really, really powerful. Just challenge, like going to the opposite end of a spectrum. What if I'm wrong? How would that change things? I think a lot about like spectrums and assumptions within mindfulness. Like if there's a worst case scenario, which is what we gravitate towards a lot in dating, like, he's going to break my heart. She's going to do this, so on and so forth. If there's a worst case scenario, logically in my head, there has to exist a best case scenario. But we're probably blind to that fact. We've probably completely forgotten about that because of everything we're talking about here. Can you open your mind to just saying and believing that it exists in some way? Great first step. Can you define it in some way? What if you're wrong about the reality you've been describing? And then just to believe that it exists. I know that sounds like rather vague, but I think a lot of the times we're in robot mode. And perhaps that's robot mode that is the result of conditioned understanding of life through childhood upbringing, relationships. The key to breaking out, I think, is just showing yourself that there's a larger menu to choose from. And I think that can be the catalyst you need to then maybe go back through your memories and say, okay, feeling, but fact, let's redefine the fact and let's move forward with it. So I really just try to bring as much logic to like breaking free of limiting beliefs or conditioned understanding of oneself. And I think maybe the example of a spectrum or just opposites is helpful.
I love that so much. I do need tactical things, right? Because it's like in those moments we don't necessarily feel it. Like if you really, really freaking feel like you're unlovable, how the hell do you break out of it? And so even having a tactic like that was like, okay, what would it look like if it was the opposite? Is a very easy, simple tool for, I think, for people to get started where they don't necessarily feel like there's a light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah. And again, I think about the words, like one of my favorite journaling exercises is a very simple one. It's one I've kind of borrowed from like habit formation, like when you're trying to encourage yourself to do something. For me, it's a journal exercise I call I'm the kind of person who, and then you just complete it with a bunch of verb statements in order to back up what is likely an adjective, because you want to say, I'm the kind of person who is successful, confident, lovable, creative, whatever, confident, whatever thing you're after. I think we get tripped up a lot when we're focused on adjectives. Like if we say like, I want to be lovable, or I believe I'm a lovable person. But then all of a sudden we quickly overwhelm that with all of our past experiences. How can we push through that and actually prove to ourselves that we're lovable? I think the solution is I have a weird relationship with words, but it's like, stop using adjectives. Let's use verb statements to, one, give ourselves credit for the things we do. And then if we're not doing them currently, give ourselves a roadmap for doing them. So like in the case of like being lovable, which is a whole other topic. What does that really mean? I think any relationship should be based on reciprocity, of course. If you're honest with someone, you deserve someone who's honest with you in return, kindness, empathy, so on and so forth. The exercise of I'm the kind of person who, well, I'm the kind of person who is willing to try first, who's willing to be hurt, who's willing to put themselves out there, who's willing to be kind, eager, open, honest. Those are powerful things. And you're like, well, I'm willing to do those things. I'm willing to do those things. And a relationship is built on reciprocity, so I deserve them in return. I am lovable in that sense, following the line of logic, as opposed to just kind of sitting in ambiguity of, worth and what you deserve. It's like, prove it to yourself. Give yourself credit for all the things you do, the things you bring to the table, even if they haven't been returned to you, which is hurtful. But remind yourself of that, sit in that space of pride, if you want to call it that, or give yourself a roadmap for doing more outside of a relationship, whatever it may be. So things like that, like, audit yourself, give yourself credit, I think could be helpful as well.
Oh my God, I love that. And the reciprocity thing is so amazing, the way you just laid that out, because I think that gives people a really tactical thing for them to start writing down, I'm the type of person that, and then go, cool, so now I should get this in a partner. And do they now actually serve me versus the other way around? And in your book, you talk about how often we like look for the other person to choose us versus us actually choosing the person. Yeah. Explain to me why we do it, obviously why that's dangerous, and then how we can start to pivot, because you very eloquently say that a lot of us, the advice that we've been given, and then also based on the hurt and pain we've been through in our relationships in the past, a lot of us now show up to be like, oh, the person that cares less wins.
I think we've all seen it on social media. It's very common dating advice. Whoever cares less holds the power. Whoever cares less wins. Whoever cares less doesn't get hurt. So on and so forth. Care less and you have power is kind of the thesis statement. And I think in theory, I kind of agree with that. I think it's kind of true. Yeah, if you don't care, you're not going to be hurt, of course, practically. If you care second, then you're not going to be rejected because you're waiting for them to care. So I think these are all practically true things. Again, to the idea of facts and feelings. So where is that coming from? Well, someone who gives that advice has likely been hurt in the past. Again, no problem. You're not a bad person for being hurt. But I think sometimes we confuse these feelings. So I think when we're thinking about like, wow, I want to preserve myself, I want to protect myself, self-preservation, it's true. But I think a lot of the times is what we fear most is being hurt again, which is true. And that's a very debilitating thing. But I think about like, what does it look like in life to give away your power? And I think it's that to a T. being the person who only reacts in reaction to other people's behavior. You're essentially waiting for permission to love, to care, to go for something, to do this, that, and the other. I think it's such a passive way to live life. And again, that's easy advice to give, because it's like, yeah, no, just go for it. If you're rejected, you're rejected. And I know life is not that simple. I could sit here all day and say rejection is whatever, you're fine. And it's not that easy for everyone. So I think a lot of the time about advice like that, care less and you're protected. And I disagree with it on an emotional level, because I think that means you've squarely put yourself in the passenger seat of life. So I think about like, how can we break through that and encourage people to say, I'm willing to care first because, one, I believe in what I deserve and I believe in what I want. I want a partner really bad. I want to share my life with someone. Great. So you're willing to go through the things that might detract from your ability to do that in the immediate. How can you put yourself in a position to be willing to be hurt? I think in order to love, you have to be willing to lose love. Matter of fact, that you have to be willing to be hurt. How do you put yourself in a practical headspace to be incentivized, not to be hurt, because that sounds weird, but to hear no, to go first and have that person say, right person, wrong time, not looking for a relationship, whatever it is. How can we practically put ourselves in that headspace? The advice I always give that has worked well for me is, again, it's focus on what the outcome is that you want. And when it comes to like going first or speaking your intention and potentially having it thrown back in your face, I always come back to the idea of when you speak up, when you speak to your intention, when you're willing to go first, you either get what you want or you get what you need. And both of those things are a win. The third, which would be to do nothing, is the only loss in that scenario. So you speak up and you say, I'm interested in you, whatever. You get what you want. They're interested in you back. Great, fantastic. You got what you want. They respond and say, I'm not interested. Well, you got what you needed. It's the result, of course, that hurts the most. And it's the result that could double down on you and make you even go even further into protection mode. But I think about the third scenario, which is what I refer to in the book as living in the gray of life, which is you're not making any decision at all. You're literally floating. You're waiting for other people to come to you and define you for you, your mission, what you want, so on and so forth. I think if those are the three scenarios, I am personally incentivized to put myself in that position. And maybe that's just me. I have a background in sales where like I always used to hear no, and I just got over it. And emotionally, I've always been willing to hear no, because the second I hear no, I'm like, great, fantastic. Now I don't have to waste time here anymore, practically. So I just try to encourage people, mantra-wise, maybe it's get what I want, get what I need, get what I want, get what I need. Those are the two scenarios, and both are redeeming in some way, as opposed to staying in a headspace of, I don't know, hopefully they'll show me, maybe if they're interested, maybe they'll set the tone. For me, I think I'm very motivated by regret in life and not wanting to look back on regret. That's a big topic. And I think that's unfortunately a fast track to regret, of hoping someone else will give you clarity when we're all so fully capable of giving ourselves clarity.
Oh God, that was so good. But the regret thing is really real. And I'm going to speak for a lot of women that are probably listening right now. If you get rejected, it now becomes about your worth. And I don't think men have necessarily been taught that, which is why I think it's somewhat easier. Again, I'm always trying not to be just generalized, but it feels like it's somewhat easier for a guy because they've been taught, hey, no, it just means you keep going. As a woman, it becomes about your worth, who you see yourself to be, and then the language you end up using. But now to the point of regret, there's two parts to it. If I keep going, it's like, I'm just going to keep putting myself out there. And now every moment of that is a chip away at my self-esteem. Now it becomes a regret to keep putting yourself out there. I wish I hadn't done it because now I don't feel good about myself. Versus the regret that you're talking about, which is I'd rather hear a no because I don't want to regret wondering.
Two very different sides of the same coin. Yeah, totally agree. I mean, what's the cliche? Better a whoops than a what if or whatever.
I like that.
That's always been my cup of tea, because regret is such a it makes me so uncomfortable even think about regret, because regret is actions or inaction that you can't change in the past. You cannot go back and change the past. And to me, that makes my skin crawl, because there I was in the past, fully capable of doing something that would embarrass me, make me feel bad, make me feel less, so on and so forth. But comparison of outcomes, I would rather feel that feeling than look back powerless. That's just me. And I know not everyone is capable of that. And to your point about men and women, I too try to stay away from men are this, women are this. But I think practically speaking, it is very true. Men are taught that shooting your shot is a logistical process.
Yes.
It's a statistical probability. You just do it until you hit gold, and then you could be emotional about it. And women, on the other hand, there's much more emotional vulnerability associated with it. So I think, I think the same advice is true there, going back to what we're talking about, facts and feelings, and like staying, not allowing those things to erode the facts that you've established, coming back to them until you eventually do find that person who doesn't, erode that for yourself.
One of the biggest fallacies is that relationships shouldn't be work. Say what? We put time, effort, and hard work into growing our careers or our business, but love should just happen? After 20 years of being married, all starts with being willing to ask and answer hard questions. I have a free downloadable PDF for you for a happy, successful, lasting love. Click the link below for free access to the most important questions you must ask your partner PDF.
But yeah, I agree. It is a tough. It is tough being a woman out there when it's maybe we've been taught to look at our self-worth through the lens, of course, of validation. I just did an episode the other day on the idea of it came from a TikTok I saw of like women being too male-focused, too male-centered. A lot of women, apparently they were kind of dunking on other women for every conversation's about a guy, every conversation's about this, like male attention, this, that, and the other. And I saw that and I was like, I didn't really know that was a thing or something to make fun of, but I was like, a lot of guys are the same way too. Like you get a group of guys together, all they're talking about as women. I was like, regardless of this, that, and the other, having your sole focus be the validation of that partnership, I think is a miss. So perhaps going back to the beginning of why are we placing so much emphasis on the worth that is provided by a partnership? Why are we doing that when, yes, of course, love is life-changing, and that person, your person, can give you something that no one else can, and it can completely change your life. I still think at the end of the day, there are some things that only you can give yourself, namely what you want in life. You can't borrow someone else's definition of what you want or what you deserve, these things. And again, just in a different way to try to encourage people to find that power in themselves, to not borrow the narratives that have been pushed on them by exes or partners or social media even. Social media saying all men are dishonest, no men are ready to date, or all women are crazy, or all women are this. Like, I think buying into those only furthers what we're talking about here when we're trying to erode our worth. We have a bad experience and then we assume everyone else is the same because we've bought into it. I think it's a very slippery slope, and finding ways to wipe the slate clean. I did an episode a while back called "Is Love Worth the Risk?" And I basically said it's not worth the risk if each time, because it is a process, each time it doesn't work out for you, if you carry that to the next time and say, this time it happened, therefore next time will be the same, so on and so forth, right? Just defining yourself by your past experience. I was like, why would it be worth it? If you've already defined your next outcome as being the same as your past outcome, practically, I can't argue with you. It wouldn't be worth it. If we knew it was a 0% chance of success, it's like, why would you work towards that? I think love is worth, that sounds like a downer of a statement, but I think logically it's true. I think love is always worth the chance, is worth the risk if we are willing to wipe the slate clean. Finding a way to wipe the slate clean. Finding a way to say, this person hurt me, but not all people are like that. Here's what I deserve, here's why I deserve it. Again, having that why connection, I think, is really important. So finding a way in our heads to wipe the slate clean of those former experiences, of course, taking the lesson, taking the standards, doing the mindfulness to look back and logically connect the dots. With the statement is, you can't connect the dots looking forward, only back. Love isn't worth the chance if you connect it looking forward based on your past experience. But if we can look back and wipe the slate clean, carry forward some semblance of a lesson, then yeah, it's always worth it. But again, that's a very hopeful outlook.
But I love it. And actually, so wipe the slate clean, actually, this is really freaking powerful, because when I read in your book, I was like, oh my God, I've never thought of it as being two separate things, because it's not starting from zero. And I think when people are in relationships, one of the fears, going back to where we very first started, right, is the loneliness part of it, is that people may stay in relationships that don't serve them because they don't want to be lonely. You may get into a relationship that doesn't serve you because you don't want to be lonely. And then when I think about partly the loneliness, that people think of that as, well, I don't want to start from square one, right? Like I've been in this relationship for 5 years. I've dedicated so much time and effort. I don't want to start from zero. But the wiping the slate clean is actually a different thing. So if you don't mind explaining that, because it's so powerful.
Yeah, I think a lot about the topic of starting over. I think the quote that always inspired me is, "You're never starting from zero. You're always starting from experience," or whatever the statement is. And I always used to think about that as kind of like, oh, that's nice and hopeful self-help advice. But the more I thought about it, the more that I come back to this idea of finding proof in life of what we're bringing with us, and like defining it. So like the kind of the soundbite that I always come back to is like, starting over doesn't mean you're getting further away from what you deserve. It means you're getting closer to it, logically, because you're moving past something that hopefully you've defined as being beneath your standard or making you feel lonely or whatever it may be. And moving that aside means you're getting closer, not further away, which is total polar opposite of how we usually think. And I think a lot about, how can I prove to myself that I'm actually bringing things with me, that I'm not starting from scratch. I'm not starting from zero. Because again, it's easy to buy into that. Yeah, I've put years into this relationship. I've defined myself by this. I've told all my friends about this. All my friends know Mr. and Mrs. or me, and like the pressure that comes from that is enormous. For me, this sounds very juvenile compared to a deep subject like that, but I've always come back to the idea of like points in life. And I know you're big on confidence and radical confidence. Originally I was thinking about confidence. Like, where does confidence come from? Confidence isn't something you can think yourself into. It's not something you could just wake up one day and say, I'm confident. Sure, there's something to be said about a mindset, but it comes from experience. Times where you were awkward, tripped, failed, embarrassed, rejected, so on and so forth. You moved forward with that and you realize it didn't debilitate you, it didn't matter, people didn't care as much as you thought they would. It makes you stronger, it makes you better, so on and so forth. So for me, I've always bought into the idea of embarrassment points, awkward points, weird points, where every time I do something where I'm like, well, that was awkward, I'm like, point, I give myself a point, and then I cash it in for confidence, right? Because confidence comes from embarrassment, right? Very simple way of thinking. But then I started thinking about like deeper subjects, like, man, what about the times that I'm disappointed? Ooh, disappointment's another one of those tough subjects, kind of like regret, because it usually comes from something that is done and you can't change it. I'm disappointed in myself. And I was thinking, man, disappointment's one of those subjects where I actually kind of buy into it, because a lot of people don't get disappointed anymore because they've lowered the bar so much, or they've disconnected themselves so much from their true pursuit of connection, where they don't feel that feeling of disappointment so much because they're just so far removed from it. And I was like, when I feel disappointed, as much as, I'm frustrated with myself for not doing or whatever, or someone else, I'm like, it's good because I still have that connection to some source of truth. I haven't become numb. I don't have a it is what it is mentality. I'm still holding on to it. So anyway, so now I have disappointment points. So back to the idea of starting over, it's like I try to prove to myself what I'm bringing with me, and using that to say I'm not getting further away from something, I'm getting closer to something. And that is the power of starting over. It's the power of temporary people. I think a lot about temporary people. Temporary people are moving you closer to what you deserve, because by definition, they were temporary. They serve the purpose, hopefully, that you're able to identify in the somewhat present. I think a lot of times it's mostly looking back, but they are proving something to you. Maybe they're offering you proof of a standard or a boundary. We're moving that along with us forward. So embarrassment points, disappointment points, temporary people points.
I love it so much. And the idea of really like assessing your emotions as you're going through them is really, really powerful. And the thing though that I try not to trap myself in is just feeling them and then believing that they're true. Now, people may be like arguing right now in the comments, like, well, every feeling is a true feeling. That is correct, but it can come from something that is false. So for instance, if you say to me, oh my God, Lisa, I really like your hair. And I'd be like, God damn, did he not like it yesterday? Right?
Yeah.
Like, and it's just that one thing was like, the feeling is that you don't like my hair. And it's like, but that actually isn't true based on what you said, right? It's just the way that I feel.
Yeah.
So the difference between like, are your feelings real or not, is something I really battle with. It's not that they're not real. Are they valid in the truth of the situation? Actually, that's a better way of saying it.
Yes.
So in those situations, I'm always the difference between having needs and being needy.
Yeah.
Like this is one that I actually battle with a lot, because I don't want to feel needy. I don't think anyone likes the feeling of feeling needy.
Right.
But I think it's super freaking important that you voice your needs.
Of course, always. Yeah.
So talk to me about, because you talk about the fact that, if you don't say what you want, how can you actually expect someone to show up?
Yeah. I can't say whether or not someone is too needy or not. I don't know them. I don't know the context of their relationship. From a mindfulness perspective, though, or just thinking about...
But from yourself, like how do you process whether am I needy or do I just have needs?
Yeah. we think that speaking to our needs is unromantic, or that our person should intuitively know exactly what we need. And if I have to speak to it, that means I'm being too needy. And I've just kind of reevaluated and reframed how I think about romance, and that I think speaking to what you need is the most romantic thing ever. And I think the right person wants to give you that need. And I think your soulmate, your perfect partner, whatever word you want to put on it, they're going to get pretty close because they are that person for you. But no one can fully know what you need and how to love you and what you like to hear until you state it. But I think in that context, we're very quick to have these conversations of maybe I am too needy, because we think that we shouldn't have to voice these things. And I think it's great. I mean, I'm sure from your relationship, you'd agree that it's great and it's healthy, and you should speak to those things, because you could have an amazing partner who wants to give you everything and love you fully, and they want to do all these things, but they can't read your mind. They can get 90% of the way there. So I just come back to this idea of we talk ourselves out because we're like, well, that's not romantic. He should know, she should know. And then we start to devolve and have these conversations, which I just think is unfair to the reality of a relationship. I'm sure you'd agree, but that's how I think about it.
1,000%. Yeah. And one of the stories that came to mind is me and my husband on our honeymoon. So we go to Rome, we went to Venice and Rome, and we're in Rome, we're there for 4 days. And so the first night, I'm like, babe, where do you want to eat? Now, at the time, my husband wasn't very experimental with his food. So being a white boy from Tacoma, Washington, he was like, he wants chicken nuggets and fries.
Oh, man.
So we're in Rome, and he says he wants to go to the Hard Rock Cafe. I was like, well, bless him, it's his honeymoon too. We'll go to the Hard Rock Cafe. Day 2 comes. I turn around because I feel like I'm a good wife. I'm going to take care of his needs. Babe, where do you want to go? Hard Rock Cafe. So we go to the Hard Rock Cafe again. 3rd night. Babe, where do you want to go? Hard Rock Cafe. We have 1 more night left. And the last night I was like, I just scream almost in his face, please, no more Hard Rock Cafe. I can't do another. I just want some pasta. Yeah. And he turns to me and he's like, why didn't you just say so? Yeah. And I was like, well, what do you mean? Yeah. And he's like, you just kept asking me what I wanted, and I told you. So it was interesting that he had no problem saying what he needs or wants, but yet here I was, just asking him, but not actually addressing what I needed. And so by the final day, it became almost like an explosion for me. Yeah. But he just was so calm and was like, you just didn't say it. And I was like, wow. And thankfully it happened at the beginning of our marriage. So I was like, well, that was a very clear-lined lesson to just say what you need and then have the discussion about how you both necessarily get what you want, and maybe you compromise or something. But it was just so enlightening.
That's a great story. I would be at the Hard Rock Cafe too. I'm a dino nugs, mac and cheese, mashed potatoes kind of guy for sure. So I respect that. A creature of habit. I love that. But yeah, I mean, again, we don't like to say women are like this and men are like this, but I do think there's some conditioning there that speaks to that, where men are like, yeah, well, because I want that, or I need that, or I deserve that. That's why I spoke to that. Whereas I think there's pressure on women in general in society not to fall into this trope of like the whiny, needy girlfriend or wife or whatever it may be. And while maybe there is room for where that is accurate, I think for the most part, it is an illusion brought about by this assumption that speaking to your needs makes you needy, too picky, or whiny. Whereas, to a man, it's like, yeah, you speak to what you want, and you speak to what you deserve. You just do it, because you can't read, your mind can't be read. So I think it is kind of a thing to sit there and be like, oh, this person will telepathically know what I want, and eventually we'll get to that state. Whereas the right person wants you to speak to those things, and to them, it's like the sexiest thing in the world. You're giving me the blueprint for how to make you feel good and love you, whether that we could even in intimacy and in emotional needs, everything. It's like the right person is going to want to hear those things, and the right person isn't going to be like, don't do that. So, but unfortunately, I'm sure there are instances where someone did speak to their needs and the person threw them back at them, or these things. That's why we don't want to be hurt twice. But I think the place of truth that I operate from is that speaking to what you want and deserve is sexy, is wanted by your partner.
And I think, I'm glad that you said that last thing, because it's I want to feel needed. It makes me feel good.
Even better point, yeah.
So have you watched the movie Daryl? I think it's called Daryl. It's really old. So the concept is that these husband and wife, and they end up having they got a robotic child, and it's like a robot. And so the robot can do everything. It doesn't need its mom. And so by the end, the mom's just so sad. And the robot's turning to the dad and is like, I don't understand mom. And he's like, because you don't need her. And so by the end, this robot kid starts pretending it needs help choosing its clothes, it needs help choosing the food. And that was what the woman needed. It's a great example of humanity, is that it feels good to feel needed. And so if you're in a healthy relationship, that actually could be a great sign, right? Whereas if you say a need and your partner actually shows up with excitement.
Yeah, I think that's great. I mean, I think, again, you talk about men and masculinity. Men want to feel like providers and powerful and action-oriented. So the right guy is, of course, going to want to give you these things. He wants to feel like, he's needed in a sense, but also that he can do these things. He can rise above. He can do it. That reminds me of a topic that I just talked about, which I'm very hot on lately, is like thinking about this idea of being in love, or like, what is love, right? The ultimate subject. And I'm sure there's no wrong answer for it, just as there's no complete right answer. But I think a lot of times we confuse love for solely being a feeling, in that we're in love. I am in love. It's an adjective. I think it's an adjective, some kind of adjective statement. I am in love. I am in the feeling, the emotion of love. Whereas, I think that's true. But what caused that is choices. Like, love is choices. Love is the choices that one makes, and they're likely choices that are amidst discomfort or aversion to doing them. That is the real, barometer for love. It's the choices that are being made. So I think a lot of times, if you're trying to gauge like the health of a relationship or your partner's enthusiasm for a relationship, like, you have to look solely at the choices that are being made, not just the feelings, because I'm sure there are instances in a very healthy relationship where on a Tuesday you're not feeling completely in love. It's just one of those days you got a lot on your mind. But if we're always looking at, am I in love? Do I feel in love as the barometer? I think we can start really rattling our cage with, well, maybe this relationship isn't right. Maybe I'm not in love. But if we're looking at the choices, you make the tough choices for them. They make the tough choices for you. They do the things because they know you want them, even if they don't want to do them. That, I think, is a great lens to look through. And I think it's a powerful way to look at love, because it's all behavior, of course, and the feeling is the byproduct, the symptom of that. So I come back to that as like looking at the choices that you're making for your partner. I think a lot of men, are quick to talk themselves out of a relationship. It's very easy to be like, oh, well, this threatens my independence, or whatever. Maybe I think in my 20s that was a big reason that I would like talk myself out of commitment. I'd be like, oh, I've got a million things I want to do. I can't be in a relationship and be independent at the same time. And those were very at odds with me. So I think coming back to like, what are the choices that you make, even if they're hard? I think that's a great way to gauge your like real truthful inclination towards a relationship. Even if they're the tough ones to make. Choices, not just feelings, choices, not just emotions, I think is a really healthy way to look.
How did you make that choice then in your 20s?
Again, about the reframing, I kind of redefined what I think the purpose of a relationship is. Talking about words and phrases, I don't like the phrase settle down. And I used to think about that phrase. Everyone used to say, I'm ready to settle down. I had my fun. I'm ready to settle down. I'm successful enough. I'm ready to settle down. And I think that gave me and gives us such a backwards understanding of what the right relationship gives us. I think the right relationship gives us the opposite of settling down with that person. It gives you more life. It gives you more of everything, because now you have this person together, which you can go out and you have this incredible safety net, and you can go out and do more and see more and, just challenge yourself more. So I think for that one, that was a reshift. And then two, specifically independence. I think the right partner makes you more independent. And I always used to wrestle with that, because I always used to think, well, partnership means you lose your independence. It's just inevitable. And maybe that's the trope that we see in movies and whatnot, or maybe there's bad examples that we look to. But there's even something called the dependency paradox, which is a psychological observation in child rearing and adolescence, where the more dependency you have between a child and a caretaker, dependency being good dependency, like loyalty, honesty, openness, like the whole thing, the tighter that bond is, the more independent the child is, because they know that they have a parent who, if they trip and fall, they'll pick them up. If they're willing to take a step out on their own and try and fail and be rejected and so on and so forth, because they know they have that safety net. And I don't know when I read about that, and obviously there's degrees to which that's healthy or not healthy, but I always thought about that within the context of a relationship. The closer you are with a partner means you're encouraged to be more independent. And again, thinking about like, we used to think that speaking your needs is unromantic. I used to think that if I looked at a relationship and one person was independent in the relationship, I was like, that's not a healthy relationship. Like something's wrong there. And I just totally reframed it. It's like, no, that outside looking in, that's good. That means they have that compassionate dependency, not codependency, but like emotional, bonding there, that they're willing to encourage each other to be independent. And that really just kind of helped me rethink the purpose of a relationship, not to settle down, not to rob you of your independence. It's literally the opposite. Again, talking about opposites and spectrum, that was really freeing for me.
Oh my God, I love this so much. As you were talking, I was thinking about the word independent. I was like, wow, how have we got ourselves so trapped in this word independent that if you're with someone, it means you can't be. And so the word independent almost now means like walls, barriers, blockages.
Yeah.
And there's a quote, God, I wish I could remember who said it, but it's something like, the most successful people are the people with the most stable home life.
Yeah.
And when I think about that, that is so true. It's a person that you don't feel like you're on rocky ground at home. So you can go out, you can be independent and try new things and try things in business or try things at work. But know that no matter what happens, you've got that stable life at home where your partner's going to be there for you.
Yeah.
And the independence thing is, I think, the fear of, I can't do what I used to. So my husband, I know who I married. He was ambitious. He is ambitious. So to me, getting married was more just me then helping him on his ambition. Not now saying, well, you were ambitious when you were by yourself, but now that we're in a relationship, this thing that makes you who you are, I now don't want that. And I think a lot of people fear that the thing that makes them them, when they get into a relationship, someone's going to try and rob them of it.
Yeah. And I think it's a normal fear, but I think it's a very misplaced fear. I think a lot about, again, the purpose of a relationship. It's not to settle down. It's not to rob you of your independence. I think about it when in the sense, the cliche of, you should try to find someone who is whole, who is, your two wholes coming together, not two perfect people, but just two wholes in the sense of that. And the idea is your partner is there to amplify what you've already created or amplify the path that you're on in a realistic sense, right? Of course, in a respectful, reciprocity driven way, but it's like their role and your role is to amplify the happiness, the drive, the fulfillment, the curiosity that is true to you. And like, I like that word, amplify. They're not there to complete you. They're not there to offer you new complete purpose and here's your life now. They're there to amplify. And that's why I'm big. Again, I encourage people as best they can to be patient and to focus on themselves and build something that only they can give to themselves in the pursuit of being whole, and then have that person come along and amplify it. And you amplify that. Like, to me, that's a beautiful way to think about a relationship. Maybe a bit idealistic, but I think the idea of amplifying, not robbing, certainly not putting, not detracting, absolutely. But I think independence is like the most practical way to bring it to life. And in my current relationship with my girlfriend, it's the perfect representation of that. Like I am very driven. I do a lot of, creative things where I'm always just chasing little things, and it's great and it's fine. And she does her own thing as well. And there is never a moment of like, ooh, I wonder if that's a bad thing that, she doesn't want to do this with me, or I'm here right now and she didn't come with me to this. It's like, no, it's like we have each other's back so firmly that we're empowered to do it.
Is there a fine line between about being these two independent people that have these drives, that have these goals and desires and dreams, and then coming together if they don't align?
Absolutely, I'm sure. I mean, I think probably come back to the idea of like love languages and like, what do you need? Like, what makes you feel loved? Like, I think if you're too independent, we lose sight of, the needs within the relationship. If it's quality time or physical touch or whatever the stereotypical things are, I think that becomes a problem. Or again, if you go to a deeper level and you're trying to prove something through your independence outside of the relationship, or like that you're worthy of being loved or things like that. Again, the full cycle there, I think that's probably where we get in trouble. But I think, as with everything, the answer is balance. I think at a certain point in a relationship, even if you are hyper independent and you're always go and you want to do things, at a certain point you need to come back to the relationship and make maybe the tough choice for the night to close the laptop and just be together. I think, again, tough not even tough, but just compassionate choices. But I'm sure it's a slippery slope, I'm sure, of people who are too defined by their work or their curiosity, where we need to come back and practice patience and some stillness. That's big for me. I think in relationships or outside of relationships, just rushing, always trying to do these things where we look back and we realize we had all these amazing moments together and we didn't appreciate them while we had them. My girlfriend and I are really big right now on being in a moment and saying, this is a core memory. You think about the core memory phase, maybe as a TikTok thing or just in general, but it's like, the only way we define core memories is looking back. You're like, man, that was a core memory. Oh, take me back, take me back to our honeymoon. Like, oh, beautiful. That was so great. It's like, that's great. It's great to reminisce. It's great to be nostalgic. But I want to say in the moment that this is a core memory, or this is a core memory together. And we're going to appreciate it as such in the moment. So like, that's big for me. That's just presence and that's just gratitude. But I think that's very, very important. And maybe that's the kind of the pause moment between two hyper independent people that, can help bring you together and actually be present. Because isn't that the point of a relationship, to be present together?
In those moments, like the core memories can be beautiful, but also they can be really detrimental, right? Like you have this beautiful relationship and then you have this one moment that can actually crack your relationship forever, that then becomes a core memory that you wish you didn't have.
Yep. Balance. Yeah. That's the toughest part. It's like, what do we do with that memory? I think the cliche is like, do we use it to empower ourselves or do we use it to hold ourselves back? I think that's the magic of life. If you can figure that out, where you have bad, frustrating memories and you can take what you need from it, namely a learning, some kind of patience with yourself. If you can do that, I think you've got 99% of life figured out. And that's the toughest thing in the world is like, what do you do with that memory? What is that proof of? Again, it's like in the court of law. Are you the prosecutor or are you the defendant? Like what is our ethos on life? Or like, I'd say like, are we glass half full or half empty? And life isn't that simple, but like, what are the facts that we've established for ourselves that we're looking to support? Not delusionally, because sometimes you deserve to be embarrassed or rejected, or like life is life, but like, what can we do with that so we don't devolve and go to this headspace of determining future worth based on past experience? That is the key to life. And if we had a blueprint for that, everyone would follow it, but I think it's unique to each and every person. I
love that. You just mentioned patience though, but in your book, you talk about one of the big things that people say, like one of the bad dating advice or relationship advice is like, oh no, like have hope that they're going to change. And like, you're just like, sometimes, like hope can actually just lead you astray and you end up staying in a relationship because you have the hope. So where's the gap or the line between patience and hope?
I think it's a fine one. I think it's a fine line. I don't know. I think for me, the question, like, I think there's a big temptation, and it's weird. We're very hypocritical. It's like we're always rushing. Of course, I'm getting older. I got to get in a relationship. I got to be SVP of this guy. I got to do these things. But then when we find ourselves in situations that aren't, reciprocated or not a healthy relationship, all of a sudden we become very patient. Oh, things will change, or, I've got that vision for the white picket fence. Like one day things will be good. So like we're very hit or miss with our emotions. It is kind of funny that we do that. So I think a big problem, of course, is we date in potential and we don't date in reality. We're very quick to give people credit for the things that we see a glimmer of hope for, and then we ignore the things that are like glaring red flags. And again, I think that's a personal balance. We need to figure out what it is that we want and deserve and hold ourselves to it. That's a personal journey. I think for me, the question I always come back to in those contexts is, in this moment, with the way the relationship currently is, not date one, date two, but like we're in the relationship, if nothing were to change from here, is this good enough for me? I don't really like the phrase good enough, but just practically, is this fulfilling enough? Is this compassion enough? Is this whatever enough, this thing that we're after? That's the most, revealing question. And certainly every relationship and every person is evolving and needing work, and we're all finding ways to love ourselves more and love other people and work through insecurities. But looking at like the measure of reciprocity in the relationship, what is given and what is received, what is the enthusiasm either way? If nothing about that were to change, is that good enough for you in the moment? I think a lot of times we don't answer that question, or we're afraid to ask it because sometimes the answer is no. And then we're back to the conversation about starting over, and that's tough. But I think finding a way, again, mindfulness, finding a way to zoom back in on the present, and instead of placing all of our hopes in potential and what could be, thinking about change, I mean, the cliche is true that, people have to want to change. You can't force someone to change. I certainly think you can be a catalyst for someone to change. You can be the reason that they change, in the sense that you have provided them proof of why they should change and they want to change, not to appease you, not to get you off their back, not so you stop whining about it or whatever things they might say, but like from a place of truth and power for them. They want to change because your example in their life has shown them why it's real, why they should, why they've been remiss this whole time. In that instance, I think change is possible, and I think you can play a role, but I'd say 90% of the time, the whole trope of like, he will change for me, or she will change, or whatever variation, I think it's misplaced. You can't force someone to change. And I think, unfortunately, we realize that sometimes late in that process where we're doing this negotiation with each other. The only proof is changed behavior, but it has to come from a place of genuine intention and why. They have to know why they're doing these things so that it's long-standing change. Otherwise, it'll just collapse on itself.
So you can't change someone. But let's say you're in this relationship and you've done all the work, you've really tried to choose the right person, you show up confident, you stand your ground, you have these boundaries, you set yourself up for success, you communicate with your partner, and over time, you start to change, but they don't. So now in this situation, I want to really tie everything that we've just spoken about together. So now in this situation, you can't change them. You've done your own self-work. You've really dug deep into finding your self-worth, but they don't change. In those moments, at what point do you walk away?
Yeah, that's tough. I mean, I don't know. To be honest, I don't know. I think the answer that I would come back to would be, have you had the conversation about their change? Maybe, for them, they have put, a ceiling on their growth and they haven't had the curiosity driving them, or for something's holding them back that isn't a reflection of their, health, of their appetite for you, their enthusiasm for you. I think that could always be true. I always try to approach things from a place of empathy. Like, you talk to a lot of women, they're like, the guy, he didn't try to kiss me after a date or something like that, or he didn't text me. And then you dive into it and, well, a couple of relationships ago, he did and was horribly rejected and made fun of, or, he did text and she was like, ew, get away from me, I never want to date you. And he internalized that, right? In the same way that women internalize things. So we're carrying with us these things that have dictated limits to our enthusiasm, to our action, maybe to our growth, things like that. So, I'm not encouraging people to be overly patient and put up with things that are clearly beneath their standard for growth and evolution. But I think, the only way to truly know is to have these conversations to see what is their awareness of yours versus theirs. Maybe this is not even on the plate. But from there, I think it's up to you. Again, I'm deciding if nothing were to change at this point, is that good enough? Because we're always evolving. And I would challenge people to not always be chasing better and more. I think, I always come back to the idea of we are always, in a sense, chasing better and more in life. And I think that's great. I think we're all capable of better and more in a sense. But I have found in my life that some of my most fulfilling moments and evolutions have come from different and simpler. Not necessarily 10x or bigger or better, but different or simpler varieties.
Chasing simpler or different versus chasing something better.
Correct. Or considering something different or simpler. Maybe the key to, a professional change or a relationship change lies in simpler. Maybe let's take some of the things out that are detracting instead of trying to just build. Maybe that's a thought. So I think just like opening your heart and your mind to like what growth looks like, as opposed to always assuming it's just this like lateral kind of on a straight line thing could be a thought. But then at the end of the day, of course, I think it comes down to that question: if nothing were to change, is this good enough? Is this growth oriented? Is it enough? And so on and so forth.
That's really strong, because again, I think through the idea that I think everyone wants a long-lasting, happy relationship, right? The happy is very important. And so every time I think through this, I've told you that I've been married for 20 years. we both evolve and we both change. So even if you do the work, right? Like if you're single and you've done the work of making sure that, you know who you are, you've done like everything that we've just spoken about. Now I just think about, you've done all that, you have this beautiful relationship, but 10, 15, 20 years down the line, you hope to be different people. And so if one of you has either grown and the other one hasn't, or if you've grown in opposite directions, what's that thing? I'm always looking, right? What's that thing that allows people to reconnect? And I've thought through this 1,000 different ways. I don't know where I would be if my husband didn't also have a growth mindset. Because I've got such a growth mindset that the advice I always give, and in fact, I get a lot of pushback on this, help me actually, Case. I get a lot of pushback because I'm like, well, do this, say this, do this. And they're like, yeah, but it's worked for you because you have a partner who has a growth mindset, who can receive that type of conversation.
Yeah. I think for me, being younger, 34, in a 2-year relationship, I think for me, like once you're in a relationship, we can't change the past, of course, but I think it's so important to define what a healthy relationship looks like to you. What is the point of a relationship? Again, finding someone with a growth mindset, I think you're going to find that person if you've aligned from the beginning that a relationship is not about settling down, right? So again, going back to what we're talking about there. So maybe that's your pre-flight checklist before you get in a relationship. So once you're in the relationship, I'm not so sure, but I do think a lot of communication is going to be healthy. But also again, it's like I genuinely challenge myself because I definitely have a growth mindset, and I think sometimes I think growth mindset's essential. I think it's imperative. But I think sometimes it can get the better of you. Of like, you're always chasing something, could be bigger, better, but why? Like, why do you want that thing that you're trying to evolve to? And we're not necessarily talking about emotional intelligence growth and, things like that, like the internal stuff, but like accolades and exposure and things like that. Like, why are we trying to evolve to that? So I really do try to challenge myself in those instances. Why? Why am I going after these things? Bigger question, like, why do I even want the things that I want? Maybe these aren't true to me, and I've tricked myself into thinking this is a growth mindset where it's really not. I'm just copying and pasting, and now that's a different conversation, and that's coming back to me. So that's how I would approach it, knowing I don't really have the breadth of a longer relationship to have a great answer to that, but like challenging yourself on, why do you want these things? Are you trying to prove something? Talk a lot in the book about mimetic desire, about why you want the things you want. Maybe they aren't true to you. Maybe you've spent a lifetime chasing something only to realize it never really meant anything to you. You just did it because you've been conditioned in a sense to want it. So society has taught you that this is what you want. And maybe you've duped yourself into thinking it's a growth mindset. So a bit of a challenge to myself or anyone in that instance to maybe take a step back and really get to the why of it before saying, this is the thing. If it's not being mirrored in a partner, it's a negative. Well, maybe we both have some work to do to decide, how are we defining these things in the first place?
I love that. I'm glad that you brought up mimetic desire, by the way. And you describe it in the book. It's like if you break up with your boyfriend and then you get with someone else, the guy, your ex-boyfriend, now wants you because they see you with someone else.
Right.
So explain what's going on. And then this is a very common thing. And I'm, again, just going to put myself as the example. I used to think, oh, well, I knew he loved me, but actually I was blinding myself to the fact that it was just mimetic desire and not actually that he wanted me.
Yeah.
What up, homie? I got something free and new to share with you right now.
How often are you visited by that negative voice in your head telling you that you're not smart enough, that you're not good enough, experienced enough, not fill in the blank? One of the most powerful things you can learn to do in life is to turn that negative voice into your bestie. And I want to teach you how to do that and so much more in my 4 steps to becoming confident workshop. And guys, the most amazing thing is you can actually register for completely free for this workshop. So click the link on your screen and I'll see you on the inside.
We find the wrong proof point there. Mimetic desire or mimetic theory is really interesting. Obviously not my own. Rene Girard is like the grandfather of it. There's a great book called Wanting by Luke Burgess, which like really dives into the whole thing. But the genesis of it was with this Professor Girard, who was this great academic in the 1700s, 1800s, 1900s, somewhere in there, basically talking about he was in a relationship with this woman, and then he was young and kind of an F-boy for all measures, and decided he wanted to play the field a bit more, and he broke up with her, and then he saw her out and about with another boyfriend, and she looked so happy, and they were great together, and then all of a sudden he found himself wanting to get back together with her, And his theory from that was the reason that he wanted to get back was he had seen a model of what he should want. That is a happy, healthy relationship. And it was a model to him about why he should want that. And he broke it all down in different ways. And he's basically spent the rest of his days as an academic looking at this idea of basically social copycat in every industry, from the things that we buy to the way that we view life, to the relationships, to consumerism, to advertising, and that there's very little in life that we have decided we want that hasn't been conditioned in a sense, in a kind of keeping up with the Joneses kind of way, and that everything has been modeled to us in a sense. Buy this, look this way, get this feeling. This is the relationship you should want, and so on and so forth. And I think it's a really interesting point, of course, because nothing in life is devoid of inspiration in some sense, and I think balance is good. I think it's great to be inspired by other people. Of course, you have to, be inspired in some sense. It's very few people create from absolute zero. We're all inspired in different ways. But I like it as a proof point that anytime I feel compelled to do something that I don't really know why I'm doing it, I come back to this point of pause and say, well, perhaps this is something that has been modeled to me by a parent, by an ex, by a friend, by the media, by social media, whatever it is. Maybe I can take pause and push back on this thing instead of just buying in blindly into a timeline, a belief, a standard, a boundary. Talk about picky when we first opened. A lot of those picky things maybe, didn't mean much to us, but we were borrowing it. The silliest example I always give is that there are some women, genuinely, and I have respect for them, who want their boyfriend to post them as their Woman Crush Wednesday on social media. And if the guy doesn't, they're genuinely upset because they see that as proof that their relationship is healthy. And then there are other women who think it's the most absurd thing in the world. So just the point of two different things. And I think about, we all could have a broad spectrum of wants and needs. And I like that as an example of some people buy into it, some people don't. And I think that's how we should approach really every desire in life, not to be that annoying, cynical person who's like, why, or like whatever, but just like to challenge the things that we feel compelled to do in order to deliver a certain outcome. I think is so powerful, because I think we'd be remiss to think that we've decided what we want completely in life. I think as we get older, certainly we've let go of a lot of the things that we've been carrying with us. We're like, I can't believe I wanted that for so long, or I can't believe I was validated by this, that, and the other. But I think 20s, 30s, I think we're very quick to be borrowing these things. And that's the essence of life. You borrow, you try it, and you let go. But some things we're holding on to. I think the big things, of course, would be money as validation, partnership status as validation, and certain accolades and superficial things like that. But I really am drawn to that idea of, why do we want what we want? Have we sat down and decided why we want it? That's my favorite word in the world, is why. If you could truly ask yourself why at multiple levels and get to the bottom of something, I think you have a lot of, very cathartic conversations with yourself where you actually do change. But I think coming back to the idea of, just recognizing that maybe there's some things in your life that you've been blindly chasing that aren't true to you, that could be the thing you need to change.
I love that. And writing down your whys of why you value things is actually really beautiful. Great way of people really assessing, because I think our natural instinct is to beat ourselves up, right? Oh, I can't believe it. I can't believe I fell for that. Or it's well, instead of beating yourself up, just say, oh, these are what I think I value. And now let me question them and see if they actually align with my true essence. I don't necessarily use that word much, but, and as you were talking as well, I do think, to your point, that we look at other people and we go, oh, that must be valuable. And I'm just going to be honest. I'm just going to be transparent. Right? I have done this when I was in my teenage years. I dumped a boy. I was 16.
Brutal.
I know, it's so horrible. I dumped a boy. And 16, it was the language we used. And then he went out with one of the popular girls in school. Yeah. And I was like, oh my God, what have I done? Because she was popular. She goes out with him. And so now I started what did I miss? Yeah. Because I thought that the popular girl had better, a better value system than I did. So I must now oh shit. And then I started regretting it. And I shouldn't have dumped him and all of this story.
Yeah. I think building on the idea of mimetic theory and desire, there's a lot to be said about then the role that conformity and pressure plays on that. I had another chapter in there about this guy named Solomon Asch. He was the founding father of conformity study, a very niche academic field, but really interesting stuff in the 50s to prove the influence that social pressure has on people. And he did this really simple experiment. I'll probably butcher it, but basically he put a bunch of people in a room where everyone was in on it except for one person. And they were trying to gauge this one person to see how they reacted to other people's answers. And basically what they did, they had a room with, call it 10 people, 9 of which were these Confederates and 1 was the true study. And he basically showed them 3 lines, just like little straight lines of different length. And then drew a third one. And he was like, which line is that most similar to of the other ones? And it was a blatantly obvious answer, right? They were all certain length. And he was, which one is it most similar to? And he had the one person answer last. So that person had to see every single answer that all the Confederates answered. And he had the Confederates give wrong answers until it finally got to that last person. And then like 75% of the case, that person just followed suit, even though it was obviously wrong. They were like, yeah, that book's green. Yep, it's green. And he did this just to prove the power of social conformity. And it was really interesting stuff because, for one, that's the power of numbers, right? You got enough people in a room saying one thing, you're going to follow suit because you don't want to be wrong. And afterwards, he would survey them. Like, why would you say that? And they would either say they didn't want to be wrong, they didn't want to be embarrassed, or to your point, they assumed that the other people knew something they didn't know. Like, well, he's like, and maybe it was green. Maybe I'm colorblind all of a sudden in this instance. And they convinced themselves of that. So like really interesting ways that we can question our decisions based on larger group think, or just, assuming that because someone else, for instance, someone else looks happy, that person looks happy on Instagram. So therefore they have something that I need. I need to mimic their life. Or a lot of people own a certain shoe. Well, that shoe must offer them something that I need. They must be aware of something, or investment strategy, or whatever is hot topic of the day. I think you combine mimetic theory and conformity plus our own robot mode. It's kind of a melting pot of challenges. Yeah. But really the only way to challenge a challenge is to be aware of it, I suppose. So that's why I included a chapter in there. And for me, it's like I'm always just trying to like, why do I want this thing? Why am I doing this thing? Am I doing it for them? Where did this come from? And then I hit why, and it's helpful.
It really hit me, and I love that part of the book because being Greek Orthodox, I think when it comes to expectations with religion or with family, it really does align with everything you just said, right? The conformity, the everyone pointing at the short line when you're like, I think it's the long one. Yeah. The 70%, like when you're in a very religious family and everyone around you is going to church and they're praying and everything, and then you're the one that's sitting there maybe saying like, I don't know if I believe in God, right? Like, obviously, that's the religious side of it. But even let's go back to relationships. If you're in, a family that, in fact, my own, everyone marries Greek Orthodox. It's like, that was just the thing. And I brought Tom into the family who's, hadn't been christened. Yeah. And so everybody was like, he's not your type, and he's not, you guys aren't going to last. And every time I would ask someone in my family why, it's like, because you guys can't relate to each other. Yeah. So it was everyone else's expectations of what they thought the value system is in a relationship, and the fact that if you come from different places, then surely you can't value each other. And so that became their value system. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we'd be remiss to also not place a lot of emphasis on the role that family, close family, distant family plays in everything we're talking about here. And it's easy to be like, oh, social media and people from college or whatever, but like family plays a huge role in establishing those things from early on. I mean, it's a reason why therapists, basically their sole job is to break down conditioning. And conditioning comes early on in childhood and adolescence, and how you're baked in to respond to the world. Like, where does your natural appetite come from? Like, how do you respond to drama? All these different things comes from that. And if you have, parents for generations that have, bought into certain things in a healthy way, perhaps, or not, it's very difficult to break free from that, much less than break free from the conformity that comes from just the greater society. So there's a lot of unlearning to be had, and I think perhaps that's the real value of journaling and therapy. It's not, again, I'm really passionate about this topic. It's not always about more and better. It's about unlearning. It's about unburdening. It's about simpler. It could be about completely different. But I think sometimes we're very bullheaded and we double down on these things, whereas maybe we don't need to. And I think that could be really liberating.
I love the unlearning part. I wish I had the quote at hand, but in your book you say something like, don't let ex-boyfriends dictate your worth. Don't let family dictate your worth. Don't let business, colleagues, like bosses dictate your worth. Yeah. And so like the unwiring or the unlearning where we get into a relationship, whether it's partner, business, family, and then we have an idea, we work hard at it, but over time, other people start to erode that feeling or that credibility that we've tried to build within ourselves.
Yeah. I mean, we're very quick to kind of outsource our needs, outsource our feelings to other people. I think the quote that I have, one of the quotes I wrote that was really popular was, life changes for the better when we prioritize how our life feels to us instead of how it looks to other people. And I think if we were to get real honest with ourselves, we do a lot of things, like literal actions, in order to look good to other people, to look good on paper, whether or not people are even looking at us. Like, we've developed this whole ethos where everyone's looking at us and cares about us. And it's just, we do these things out of that. And I think a true compassionate, free, most importantly, free life is one where we're doing things because it feels rewarding to us. And not in like a hedonistic, going all in way, but like reprioritizing, why are we doing the things we're doing? Are we doing them to look good on paper to other people and then hope that a personal feeling of fulfillment comes from that? Or are we doing things because it feels good to us and honors our truth? That's always a word that I've struggled with. What does our truth mean? I mean, that's just literal radical honesty that's backed by why. Are our actions following that? Or are they following some larger, system of attention or influence or impressing other people? I think that's the question we have to answer, and it could take a long time, I suppose, to come up with a system that helps you break free. But I think at least recognizing that there's a difference between actions that look good to other people and that feel good to you. It's great to find the sweet spot where it's one and the same, but that could take a while.
Yeah,
too.
Just know which one your North Star is, though, right?
At least have taken time to determine that you have a North Star. Because the whole book and like everything that I do is just about this idea of being in the gray of life. I started the podcast in 2018, like 5 years ago. And it was just because I felt like I was living in the gray, dating people just to date, working this job just to have a job, but also to define myself by being a good salesperson, all these things. And I was like, man, it would be really frustrating to look back and regret these paths that I kept going down for so long, kind of adrift, and just hoping that one day someone or something or some accolade will come along and say, hey, you've been doing the right thing, congrats. So I just really wanted to challenge myself to get out of the gray, to get out of ambiguity, to not have I call it a defeatist mentality, it is what it is kind of vibe, and just be more active and less passive in my life. And I think, how can I act? How can I speak more in alignment with these things as opposed to just thinking them? That I think is always going to deliver the outcome that grows you, or that introduces you to bigger, to better, or different, or simpler.
Well, you've given us so many things to act on now, and your book, That's Bold of You, has so many things that we really can use to act. So where can people find you? Where can people find your new book and everything you're doing?
Well, thank you so much. The book's That's Bold of You. Obviously, it's nice and yellow and
nice
pink.
And bold.
Can't miss it. That's the idea on the bookshelf. Case.Kenny on Instagram, and then the podcast is New Mindset Who Dis if you want to hear me talk more about these things.
Guys, keep watching to learn the 4 signs you're in an unhealthy relationship.
So when we're talking about validation, feeling valued, I think of it as 2 parts. It's one, doing the work internally for ourselves and making sure that we have a foundation for ourselves to feel valued. And then secondly, that addressing the line in a relationship where it is their responsibility to show you that you're valued, but your self-esteem isn't relying on it. And I want to go to something that you said when you first started, when clients first started coming to you, and you would ask them, the first question is, what is your main strengths and what is it that you love about yourself? And your shocking answer, if you wouldn't mind sharing it with my audience, and then I really want to dive deep into it.
Yeah, so I always ask my clients, what do you love about yourself? What are some of your strengths? And I've been so surprised because a lot of people really struggle to even come up with one thing that they love about themselves, one strength. And so that's something that I always work with my clients on is building themselves up and finding things that they love about themselves, knowing their strengths, because that helps them in their own life, but also in all of your relationships. If you know what you have to bring to the table and the value that you bring to a relationship, it's going to make that relationship that much better.
Yeah, I love that. So what is your advice then on those first steps for someone to really start looking at how they value themselves first, before they maybe even enter a relationship?
Yeah, there are always things that we can find to appreciate about ourselves. It can be as simple as, I love that I exist. It's so simple. It's so simple. I love that I exist. I encourage people to write love letters to themselves, love letters to their bodies, practicing affirmations and just affirming and validating yourself every single day. And sometimes the self-affirmations start with, I accept that I'm struggling with this right now. I accept that I am where I am, and that's okay. And we work towards affirmations that are more of, I love myself. I love that I have the courage to show up here today. Love that I have the courage to share my gifts with the world and to go about my day and experience connection with others.
Okay, that's amazing. So now let's take it into, you've done the work and now you're entering a relationship. How do you marry the two? When I mean marry the two, making sure that your value system, how you see yourself, your self-esteem isn't fragile, so that when you enter the relationship that it becomes, let's say on shaky ground, or fragile when you're in a relationship that maybe someone isn't paying you the attention that you should deserve or that you need.
I think it's totally normal to seek validation from the people around us. We all want to be accepted, right? And sometimes we just need to be reassured that we're still connected to the people that we love. So when we're seeking validation, we're really seeking connection. And it can be incredibly healing to receive validation and be reminded of our goodness and value in a relationship. And validation is actually a communication skill that's really important. It helps people to feel heard and understood and appreciated, and it can calm fears and anxieties, and it can help to repair the relationship when there's been a rupture. And so validation is a skill that I think everyone should learn, how to validate each other. And it's okay to sometimes feel like you need validation from the people around you. The issue is that when we need validation from others to feel lovable and worthy, and when our self-worth is based on that external validation, it can become an issue, because when that happens, we're essentially putting the other person on a pedestal, and there's a power differential there. And so it's also an issue when we're so eager for that validation that we allow others to dictate our feelings and how we behave and live our lives. So sometimes when we're seeking validation, we're just needing a little more safety and connection and reassurance in the relationship, and that's okay. It's normal. We all kind of seek validation from others, and when we're seeking that external validation, we can be very externally focused on the relationship, and it can be helpful to look within and get clear about why we're seeking that validation. What's going on at the core of it? And if it's some self-esteem issues, that's okay, because there may be a really great opportunity there to learn something about yourself and to connect with yourself and to learn more about yourself and learn how to love yourself in that relationship. So if that's something that is like recurring in relationships, is struggling with self-esteem or needing a lot of validation from another person, it just helps to validate yourself more. And because the more you love yourself and the more that you validate yourself, the more confident you are.
I love, Jordan, love that you say it's okay to seek validation in other people. I'm always trying to grow and evolve, and every episode I ever do, I end with be the hero of your own life, because I do believe that all of my strength needs to start from within. But at the same time, I've been with my husband for 20 years. We've been married for 18. And it's like, I absolutely do turn to him for certain things. And it has been a process for me to really go through, it's okay to lean on them. It's okay to look for certain things. But it sometimes can be detrimental if you're giving everything over. And where is that fine line between being independent, being confident, being your own person, and not relying on other people to give you your own self-esteem, and at the same time absolutely saying, yes, it's okay that you look to other people, and yes, we should be expecting a certain amount of validation or value from our partner. So when saying it's okay to look for validation from somebody else, how do you do that and know you're not spilling into neediness and not having your own strength to do it yourself?
Yeah. Well, and it's not a black or white thing, right? It isn't bad to seek validation. It's totally normal to want to be validated by others. And when our self-worth is tied to that validation, we have an issue, because our self-esteem is then based on something that's external and out of our control. I hear all the time, Like, don't seek external validation outside of yourself. That's not a good thing, but it's normal. It's normal to need to be validated, and especially in relationships, it's a really important part of a healthy relationship. And so, in all relationships, there's a balance between me and you and us. There are three parts, right? Me, you, us. And healthy relationships have a balance between all of those parts. So if you're too dependent, you become enmeshed and there isn't much individuality, and you begin to over-sacrifice your needs for theirs. Your boundaries get blurred. Maybe there's an over-reliance. You may not spend much time away from the relationship or have many friends or hobbies, and all kinds of issues arise. And sometimes then our sense of identity is really, really tied to the relationship. It's just, there's a really big enmeshment there. But then on the other end of the spectrum, if you're too independent, you begin to lack connection, and your relationship may become emotionally distant and lack intimacy. So then your sense of identity or self-worth or validation is maybe not tied at all to the relationship. And so I think there's a healthy middle ground, and all couples have to learn that balance between me and we, and find that healthy balance. And that's what we call interdependence. There's a healthy individual and a healthy couple identity. And interdependence allows you to express love without sacrificing yourself. And in interdependent relationships, there is a lot of validation. There is a healthy couple identity, but you don't lose that sense of me in the relationship. And that allows for good cooperation and communication and compromise, and you'll have healthy boundaries that are maintained that create emotional safety. So finding that interdependence, I think, is really key, and that can be a really healthy balance, but it really isn't black or white because it looks different for every couple.
Oh, I love that you say that. Like, it's like I'm always looking for that one key insight, and then ultimately I always know it's never black and white, and it's never just one thing, right? So it's like the playing of the both. I've heard you talk about communication, and when I heard you say this, I was like, what? You said it's right now studies are showing that it's between 70 to 93% of our communication is non-verbal. I found that extremely fascinating because I'm always talking about verbal communication, identifying words, what words mean to you, how words matter, things like that. And when you said that stat, I was like, wow, okay, I really want to go deep on the how do you do the non-verbal communication. And I heard you say a study, I believe it was the Gottman Institute study, where they followed couples for 6 years. And can you tell my audience about that study, and then the results, and how that is a great indicator of how we should be behaving, if you will?
Yeah, so like a lot of communication is nonverbal, and oftentimes we overlook the nonverbal communication when we're talking about communication skills and how we communicate. And a huge, huge, huge thing is turning towards someone when we're communicating with them. How often when someone's trying to talk to you, are you looking away or looking at your phone? Are you not looking at them? And so that's just making eye contact, turning towards. There are really simple things that we can do to improve our nonverbal communication and really send signs of engagement and safety to the other person when they're communicating with us, showing them that we're curious and that we're interested. And so the Gottman Institute has done tons of research on couples, and they follow couples. Over 6 years, they'll follow couples. They'll check in 5 years after marriage, 10 years, and to really see, they're trying to figure out what works in relationships and what doesn't. And so in their research, they've found that there are 4 types of communication that predict the end of a relationship. So the first type of communication that predicts the end of a relationship is criticism. And we all know what criticism sounds like. It's, you never help with the cleaning, you're so forgetful, or you never consider me. And you'll notice that criticism almost always starts with the word you. And I found that when one partner is trying to bring something up that they want to talk to the other person about, maybe it's something that they're wanting to change, they do it by criticizing and you statements. And I see that all the time. And we can predict the way that a conversation will go 96% of the time based on the first 3 minutes of the conversation. The first 3 minutes determines how this conversation is going to go. So it's really important to learn how to start a conversation well. And how often do we try to bring something up with a criticism by criticizing someone? And so instead of starting a conversation with you statements like you didn't do this, or you're this, or there are so many you statements that we say.
We have a lot.
A lot. Yeah. I give couples a formula to use that starts with I. And the formula is I feel blank about blank. I need blank. So for example, instead of criticizing and saying you never help with the dishes, you can say, I feel overwhelmed about the dishes. I need some help. And it's even better if you end with appreciation or a compliment, because it helps your partner to feel appreciated and loved, and they're more likely to help you out. And so then contempt is the second type of communication. And this is the single greatest predictor of divorce, according to the Gottman Institute's research. And contempt looks like mocking the other person, ridiculing them, calling them names and insulting them, or mimicking or using sarcasm or rolling your eyes. Those are all examples and signs of contempt. And it's really just a disregard for the other person that comes from a belief of moral superiority. So it's fueled by negative thoughts about the other person. And an example of contempt would be rolling your eyes and saying, I get it. You don't have to tell me a million times. Do you think I can't hear or something? That's one that I've heard, and that one's rough. And so the antidote to contempt is building a culture of appreciation and respect in your relationship by reminding yourself of the other person's positive qualities and why you love them, and expressing appreciation and feeling gratitude for what they're doing right. It's looking for what they're doing right and assuming the best rather than assuming that they have bad intentions. And then doing small positive things for them every day to show that you love them.
Man, contempt is such a strong topic, and I believe it becomes a stacking stone. It's not just that you wake up one day and then all of a sudden you have contempt for somebody. So what do you do, or how do you prevent contempt? So you actually said, saying nice things to someone, like maybe on a daily basis or things like that. Like, that's great. But how do you prevent someone else from having contempt for you?
You can't, right? We can't control others' behaviors. We can't control others' thoughts. We can set boundaries and ask for respect in communication. We can ask them, hey, can we retry this? Can you, or say, I'm feeling attacked right now, or I'm feeling hurt by the way that you communicated that. Can we try again and reconnect? And so there are ways you can't control whether or not they feel contempt or express contempt, but we can set boundaries, and we can ask for respectful and kind communication.
Wow, I really like that. So if you're sensing contempt in your partner, kind of stop, address it, say, hey, you've really, express how you feel about that. I think that's super important. And then highlight it. Because here's, I think, what a lot of people do, myself included, back before I had a growth mindset. I would ignore it, right? I would ignore the contempt. And it would just start to build inside me, right? People start, he keeps giving me the dirty look, but it's like, oh, it must be in my imagination. And you end up ignoring it until one day it ends up becoming like the biggest fracture in your relationship.
Yeah. And it usually does. It builds up slowly over time. If we don't address it immediately, it kind of sits in the back of our minds, and then it happens again and again and again. And that's where we start building these protective walls that create distance. So that we, naturally we're wanting to protect ourselves. If we're feeling attacked, or if we're feeling like the other person is expressing contempt, we might get defensive. And that's the third one, is defensiveness. And that's really a way that we try to protect ourselves by reversing the blame and making it seem like it's the other person's fault. And this almost always escalates conflict, because when one person gets defensive, usually the other person does too. And so we combat defensiveness by taking responsibility for our actions and getting curious and trying to understand, where is the other person coming from? What is their perspective? And can you set aside your own thoughts and feelings for a moment to try to understand where they're coming from? Can you feel empathy for how they're feeling? And can you take responsibility for your part in the conflict or in the situation and offer an apology if it's needed?
Yeah, that's so true. I'm curious on what the fourth one is.
Yeah, the fourth one is stonewalling, which is shutting down and withdrawing because you're emotionally overwhelmed. And when stonewalling happens, your nervous system is flooded, which means that your heart rate is increased and you're in fight or flight, or your sympathetic nervous system's activated. Your body releases stress hormones, and now you've dropped down into a freeze state. And when you're in a freeze state, you'll usually stop responding. You'll turn away, maybe you'll act busy, or you'll tune the other person out and pretend like you can't hear them. And you're really just trying to avoid confrontation, and you're shutting down in self-protection. And stonewalling is especially frustrating to the other person because usually they take this to mean that you don't care, because it seems like you don't care. And so how we address stonewalling is we take a 20-minute break to self-soothe. And I say 20 minutes because research has found that it takes an average of 20 minutes for your body to calm down and for your nervous system to regulate when it's dysregulated, or when you're flooded. So take a break, plan a time to come back to the conversation, and spend those 20 minutes practicing self-care or doing something that will help you to regulate and soothe your nervous system. And something that's interesting is that research has found that women tend to criticize more and men are more likely to stonewall.
That doesn't surprise me, to be honest. You just mentioned flooding, but I've never really heard much about it. Can you talk to me a little about flooding?
Yeah, so flooding is when our neuroception is always looking for cues of danger and cues of safety. And if we are getting some signs of danger, usually we are in conflict. Our neuroception is always asking, is this person safe? Can I trust them? Do they care about me? And if we start to feel like they don't care, or if we have any cues of danger, our nervous system will go into fight or flight, and our sympathetic nervous system gets activated. And so typically then our heart rate will increase, blood pressure sometimes increases. We start to feel emotionally overwhelmed. We can feel anxious. And so when we get flooded, we'll either fight or flight. And if we feel like neither of those are going to work, we'll shut down and we'll drop down into that freeze state that we talked about. And that's typically when stonewalling happens. But the key is to learn how to regulate your nervous system. If you notice that you're starting to get activated and flooded, to take a break, to self-soothe, to regulate your nervous system, because if you're flooded, your prefrontal cortex is essentially offline. We're not able to think clearly. We're not really able to fully listen to another person and understand where they're coming from, because we're in that survival mode and all of our protective defenses are up.
Yeah, I love that that breakdown. And then I've heard you say one way of just kind of eliminating it is just like give your partner a hug.
Yeah. Give your partner a hug. Make a repair attempt. Turning towards the other person to co-regulate. A hug is a way to co-regulate. So we can self-regulate, which means we self-soothe. Breathing exercises are a really great way to self-regulate. Progressive muscle relaxation. There are a lot of different ways that you can regulate your own nervous system, but we can also co-regulate or regulate our nervous systems with another person when we're flooded to help us calm down. And so a hug is one way to do that. Taking a deep breath together, just pausing to repair and send some cues of safety and remind each other that you care in that moment, because that will help your body to feel more safe, and that will help your nervous system to relax a little bit more so you can shift back into that parasympathetic, safe and social state.
Yeah, there's something, the power of a hug, and that's the one thing that bums me out about COVID is I'm such a hugger, and I got so much pleasure out of hugging people that it's sadly no longer something I can regularly do. But there is something to a hug. I totally agree there. So the studies on the Gottman Institute, you said that they followed couples 6 years after they got married, and the people that ended in divorce turned out they were only turning towards each other 33% of the time. And the couples that ended up in a successful, happy marriage turned towards each other 86% of the time.
Yeah.
Like, just turn towards.
Yeah, turning towards. And so we make bids for connection to our partners, to people all the time. whether it's just saying, hey, look at this, or asking a question, or anytime we're talking to someone, we're making an effort to connect with them. And so they observed couples, and they noticed that the couples that didn't last, they didn't turn towards each other. And the couples that did last, when one partner tried to get their attention, they turned towards them. They responded. They put down what they were doing. They looked up, looked at the other person, and responded. And I've started to be very aware of that in my relationships. If someone is seeking my attention, am I making them the priority, or am I making whatever else I'm doing the priority? And where are our priorities here? And it's so, so important to respond and to turn towards each other when someone's seeking your attention.
Yeah. And I actually heard someone quite a long time ago, actually, it was like a study, and they said you can also tell how well someone's going to last based on how they tell the story of how they met. So if you ask the couple, like, oh, how did you guys meet? Based on if they say it in like a lighthearted way, if they jump in on, oh no, baby, it happened like this. Or if one person's just saying, the other person's staying silent. And I was like, that's actually really fascinating to see. And so now I'm very conscious. If anyone ever asks me, I'm like, I'm putting in like excitement and energy, because I think it's really good to keep going back to your roots of where you as a couple first started and keep that energy alive.
Yeah, I've noticed that in sessions when I ask couples about their relationship history, couples that are in happy relationships tend to remember and share their positive memories. And they also frame their difficulties or struggles in the relationship from a place of learning. They talk about how they've grown from their struggles and how they draw strength from them. And in couples who only share negative memories and have difficulty remembering the positive memories, that's when you know that negativity is starting to outweigh the positive in a relationship. And usually this escalation of negativity happens gradually and slowly, and it happens over time. And you start to express less interest in each other's lives. You show less appreciation. You compliment each other less and less, and you'll slowly start to notice their flaws and start to entertain more and more negative thoughts about each other. And without that open communication and repairs, before you know it, you're feeling a lot of resentment and frustration. You'll feel like you've fallen out of love and lost the spark. And you'll start this cycle of negativity and distance that really doesn't turn around without effort. So we have to retrain our minds by starting to focus on our partner's strength and positive traits. And we have to start making repairs by making efforts to connect and communicate openly and show appreciation and love for each other. It's really interesting. We've been talking about some of the Gottman Institute's research, and they found that in stable, healthy relationships, the ratio of positivity to negativity during conflict is 5-1. And then during normal interactions outside of conflict, it's closer to 20-1. So for every one negative interaction, there need to be 20 positive ones. And then in unstable relationships that are headed towards separation, that ratio is closer to 1-1. So for every that's one negative interaction for every positive interaction. And those are the couples that don't last. So this means that for every one negative interaction during conflict, you need at least 5 positive interactions to balance it out if you want to keep your relationship stable and healthy. And those 5 positive interactions are the repairs that we've been talking about, their efforts at reconnecting, they're turning towards and just slowing down and showing that you care about each other.
Girl, I'm so obsessed with stats, and that is so impactful. What would you then suggest? Because I love stats. It wakes me up, and then I go, well, now how do I use that stat to benefit my life? So when I think about people at home, it's like having a relationship for 20, 30, for the rest of your life is difficult. We change, we grow, we're always evolving. So to me, I put so much time and attention into my marriage, into my relationship, and addressing the things that are wrong instead of putting blinders on. And so if people, and look, that's worked very well for me in my relationship. And so taking those stats, what would you suggest people do? Is it kind of stepping back and saying, all right, I've just heard this stat from Jordan. Do I stop and just assess myself for like a week and go, how many times am I criticizing my partner? How many compliments did I give them? And vice versa. And then go, oh, it's like 2-1, and kind of like snap yourself awake. Like, how do we actually then take that data and go, let's use this to benefit our relationship?
Yeah, I think it's the little things that you do every day that matter. And it's the little stuff that adds up over time and can make a really big difference. And that's also the preventative work that you can do in relationships. So it's the everyday little things like complimenting your partner, expressing appreciation, reaching out to show affection, and creating small rituals of connection throughout your day, like giving a hug and kiss every time you leave the house and when you come back home. And I'm not sure who first came up with this idea, but there's a metaphor that I love that is the emotional bank account. So every relationship has an emotional bank account, and you can make deposits into this account every time you listen with your full attention, every time you keep your promises, when you show affection, when you make repairs, when you do something nice for the other person. And you make deposits by doing things that build support and love and trust in the relationship. And then you make withdrawals every time you criticize or break a promise, or when you don't look up from your phone when your partner's talking to you, when you turn away, when you don't respond. And your account balance usually determines how you feel about the relationship. It indicates how well you communicate and how well you resolve conflict, and it's an indicator of the health of your relationship. So you want to make as many deposits as possible into your relationship's emotional bank account to pull from when you're going through a rough patch, or when you're going through a hard time, or when you're in conflict. And so it's the small things over time that really do add up and make a big difference.
Do you also hold the account details of your partner? Because what I actually loved of what you said is you look at your own deposits, right? What are you putting into the relationship? What are you taking out of the relationship? That was so strong. And then it started to make me feel like, should we do that for our partners as well? Or is that like now a trap where people are like, look, see, I've written down, you've only made like one deposit. Like, is that a good strategy? Do you think a bad strategy?
Yeah, I don't think that is really helpful, because that can bring resentment. But if you're noticing that you're needing more deposits, you're needing more attention, affection, your positivity from your partner, that's a really great conversation that you can have together. And that way you're both conscious and aware of how can we show each other more love? How can we be making more deposits? And so framing that in more of a positive way, because I don't think the scorekeeping is helpful.
I know, that's why I was like, it really is helpful for yourself, but it almost does the complete opposite when you do it for them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love it. I also heard a quote from yours that's super interesting. You said a lot of conflicts come from not feeling seen or heard. And when we don't feel seen or heard, we don't feel loved. That was so strong, because we're talking about a lot of elements here on what make up a successful relationship. And it kind of comes all the way back around to feeling valued, feeling validated, wanting to be seen, having every right to ask to be seen. And then if that is the one thing that falls down, then you actually do not feel loved. Like, that's so strong. So how do you ask to be seen? How do you ask to be heard?
Well, and I'm not sure if you've ever heard of the 5 love languages by Gary Chapman, but the whole premise of that is that we tend to give love in the way that we like to receive it, and sometimes we're needing to receive love in a little bit of a different way than it's being shown. And so just having a conversation with your partner about, hey, I'm needing to feel more appreciation and love from you, and this is how I would really like to be loved, and it's okay to ask for that, and it's okay to ask, hey, can we have some more conversations? Can we go on a walk every evening and just talk? Because I want to get to know you better, and I want you to get to know me better, and I want to stay curious about each other's inner worlds and what's going on with us.
So where's the fine line between asking your partner to reciprocate all these things that you've said, hey, I want to go for a walk, once a day. That's something that I actually really need to feel connected to you, to feel seen, to be heard. And they turn around and they say, well, that's way too much. You're being very needy. I can't give that to you. And then it becomes, I think, a struggle between how they see it and then how you see it.
Yeah, well, and I think in a healthy relationship, you care about each other. You care about each other's feelings and needs. So if one person is feeling like I need to be more connected to you, then it's just a really important conversation to have of this is, what can we do to help you to feel more loved and safe and connected? And it's I think a lot of times we feel guilty, like we shouldn't have to ask for that validation or appreciation or love, or to have to ask to do activities that help us to feel more connected. But it's totally okay to ask. And it's so important to ask, because otherwise we end up, like we talked about before, brushing things under the rug. We end up feeling disconnected and more distant. And so it's if they're not wanting to do that, then, we need to have a conversation about, do we really care about each other? Are we really staying curious about each other's inner worlds? And are we showing empathy for each other's needs? Because if not, then that's an issue. There are so many little ruptures every day, whether it's just, that moment of not turning towards each other that we talked about. And that's totally normal in relationships, but the whole, like, what makes the biggest difference is repairing, how we repair those ruptures. And do we turn towards each other? And do we, when we're feeling disconnected, make those efforts to reconnect? And whether it's in conflict or outside of conflict, that's so important.
And is that a discussion that you would have with your partner and say, hey, are we committed to making the repairs of these ruptures?
Yeah. And just having a conversation, like knowing what ruptures and repairs are, right? So it's like, what is a rupture? It's a moment of disconnection or an emotional wounding, and they can be really small. They can be really big. Big ruptures are more of like attachment injuries, where there's been a huge break in trust. But the little ones could just be like not maybe someone not showing empathy, or not asking you how your day was when you expect them to. That could be a rupture. And so when ruptures happen over and over again without repair, you slowly disconnect and build those protective walls. And that's when you start to see more resentment and anger and apathy and doubt coming up in a relationship, because if there's a lot of repeated ruptures and wounding, it damages the emotional bond and you don't feel safe anymore. And so, like we talked about, our subconscious is always looking at, does the other person care? Are they there for me? Can I trust them? And so if we don't repair it, it hurts the trust and the intimacy, and it's kind of like a slow burn with more distance over time. And so, finding emotional completion after conflict or negativity and hurts, if we don't, the resentment builds up. And so we kind of have to emotionally digest, these issues together and create emotional safety and reconnect to move forward. So repairs are just, it's a way to just shift the energy and reconnect and to show that you love each other. But
well, I got a question for you, Jordan. Let's just keep going, girl, because this is fascinating. Is it ever too far gone? Is a rupture so bad that there is no repair?
It depends on if there's a willingness to repair on both parts. The biggest rupture you could be seen as infidelity. That's one that is a huge rupture, because I call that an attachment wound. Like, rupture is, there's a rupture, but when it's that deep, it's an attachment wound. And those are really, really tough to get through. And it is possible if both are willing to make the efforts to repair. If the person who maybe was the one who did that behavior and ruptured the relationship is willing to take responsibility and cares about the other person and cares to repair. And if both are willing to repair, it's possible. But it takes a lot of effort, and it's not easy to do. And so, we've talked about repairs, the positivity, turning towards each other every day. There are ways to repair, every day with the little ruptures, and those are the deposits to the emotional bank account. And during conflict is the best time to make repairs. It's a way to shift the energy and reconnect and remember that you love each other. And how you repair depends on the nature of the rupture, but just simple ways of repairing are showing your attention, expressing curiosity and affection, maybe reaching out to hold their hand and saying how much you appreciate them, doing something nice for them, making them food, saying I love you. There are lots of different ways to repair, and it's hard to do. It can be really hard to do in conflict when we're wanting to pull away, when we're feeling hurt, but those are the times when it's most important to repair. And so it looks different, whether it's during conflict or just the everyday repairs or deposits, or after conflict, it looks a little bit different, but it's just bringing in more of that connection and care and positivity is what makes a big difference.
Yeah, I love that so much. And my husband and I have a rule that if we're in conflict, whoever can become emotionally sober first. Normally I'm the one that needs to walk away. I need the 20 minutes, like what you said. I need to regroup myself and then I come back in the room. And so usually if we're in conflict and I walk out the room, whoever is able to emotionally get sober first, we've made a pinky swear with each other that you walk into the room, whoever's in the mood first, walk into the room and go, baby! And if you're listening to this on podcast, I put my arms up straight in the air and I smile and I scream it like with that voice. Even when we're mad at each other, even when we're livid with each other, we've made a deal that one of us must do it. And it works like a charm, because the second, even if you're mad at them, the second someone walks in and does that, it's like, wow, he's willing to put it all aside. And he's like, he's happy. He's got his arms up. The tone of his voice is welcoming, and it shifts the mood immediately. Now, the only problem is sometimes you don't feel like responding, right? You're like, no, I'm still hurt. I'm still upset by you. And so once that happened and I did the baby and he was still pissed, and I said, we made a deal. You know how hard it is for me to break out and for me to do the baby? We agreed you can never push back, because it's hard to be the first person to do that. And we agreed that if someone does, the other person must reciprocate. And I said, you've just broken our deal. You must. And then, of course, I got mad. So then he was like, baby. I'm like, no, I'm mad. And it became like this like back and forth for 3 times. And then at the end, after like the 3rd time, we're like, okay, this is ridiculous. We both are just, trying to make it better. We're trying to heal. We're trying to, repair this wound. And we're like, kind of like actually opening the wound more and more. So let's do it together. 1, 2, 3. We did the baby and then we solved our problem.
I love that you found that fun way to make repairs. You're doing it naturally. And we do it naturally without realizing that we're doing it. But sometimes when we put language to it, it gives context, and then we can be more conscious to look out for, do we need a repair? Has there been a rupture? And how does that happen? And you can plan, like you've made that decision. Like, this is how we repair. This is how we show each other, I'm trying to make a repair right now. And you can even just say, I'm trying to reconnect. I'm trying to make things better. This is really hard for me, but I'm trying to show you that I love you, right? And some couples come up with like a code word like giraffe or, like watermelon, or just something silly that's like an inside joke. And that humor can really help to break that ice and to bring you back together and remind each other we love each other. This is why we're here together. It's totally normal to experience times of disconnection in our relationships. A lot of people think that we shouldn't have conflict. We have these beliefs from childhood or just from society that we shouldn't have conflict, that and so we avoid it, or we feel like there's something wrong. But it's totally normal to experience conflict. It's totally normal to experience times of disconnection in your relationship. And we usually go through cycles of connection and disconnection, cycles of closeness and more distance. And that's pretty normal, but it does take work to reconnect when there's distance, or if you're feeling disconnected, because we can't expect to see change in the relationship if we're not changing our thoughts and words and our actions and patterns of communicating and interacting and making efforts to show each other that we love each other.
That's fantastic. There's something that I heard you say where I was like, oh, we've got to talk about this, because again, it goes to like the nuance of the comment. So I've heard you actually say that there are certain fundamental needs that every single human human needs. And there's 2 that I pulled out, and it was actually an Instagram post that you did. And there's 2. One was certainty and the other one was uncertainty. And so I was like, that is so amazing that they contradict each other, and yet you need both. And in a relationship, I think we look for certainty. And the second there is uncertainty, it makes us feel unnerved in the relationship. So how do we take the fundamental needs as a human of the uncertainty of growing, and yet use that as a strength in our relationship instead of potentially a weakness?
Yeah, and there is a balance, right? Because we want to feel a sense of safety and emotional security in a relationship, but at the same time, if there isn't any sort of uncertainty, and uncertainty can look like a lot of different things. It can look like surprises, like that we're going on a surprise date. That's the fun sort of uncertainty, that it's really healthy to have a good balance of that. And uncertainty in the sense that we also like recognizing we don't know everything about each other. I've been in a relationship with someone for 8 years and we're still learning about each other every day. And so there's that balance between the certainty and the uncertainty. And when there's a lot of uncertainty, especially in our external world, in our environment, especially this last year and a half, there's been a lot of uncertainty in the world. Our relationships can help to buffer us from that when we create a sense of safety and certainty and in the relationship. But there's a balance. There's a balance to everything.
Click here and learn right now how to find and keep real love.
They've had bad breakups, they've dated the wrong person, they've struggled with connection, maybe they've been abused, whatever it may be. And one question I'd always ask people is, what did you